Welcome to this week's edition of the Empathic Designer podcast. I'm your host Vaidishwaran. This is the third of the 7-part series on performance needs analysis. As we begin to dive deep into the specific areas of the performance needs analysis, let us start with the audience profiles and personas. They are the reason why we are doing this entire exercise in the first place, and the success of our recommendation really depends on them. We typically begin by asking the stakeholders to identify the audience for this intervention. It is important to know whether the audience is from a single or from multiple functions. We can then ask about their size and geographical distribution. These are very important first steps to determine the number of personas we'll create and to determine what these personas will have in common and what makes them unique. In the previous episode, we were able to get some answers around the priorities of the organizations. It is now time to list the priorities and goals of our audience. While the ideal method of doing this will be talking to a sample of the audience, we can still do with the responses from our stakeholders on this. Our subsequent questions should help us validate this. With this list in place, we can start probing in deeper to understand our audience by asking how does this audience perceive this performance gap and an intervention. What is the attitude of the audience towards the subject area? Answers to these questions will reveal critical information that will help us build our audience profile. We can then discuss with our stakeholders around the consequences for the audience if this performance intervention is not put in place. This should get most of the puzzle pieces in place. Finally, to understand what makes our audience click, it is important to put ourselves in their shoes and walk through their typical day. How do they commute? What devices do they use? What is their style of working? How do they interact with each other? How do they interact with their managers? What are their personal preferences, likes and dislikes? If it is possible, ask for an interview with some top performers for an understanding of what works for them. Answers to all these questions will help us create our audience personas. An audience persona provides a pivot point for consultants to ask themselves, will this work for him or her at every stage of developing the performance recommendations? An audience persona also helps in generating a narration for the presentation of our solutions to the stakeholders. Keep in mind that at every stage we should resist the urge to stereotyping them. When we look back into our notes to create the audience personas, we must ensure that we are unbiased. I recommend having an internal brainstorming session with your team to validate your audience personas. With a clear understanding of our audience, in the next episode, we will talk more about the performance gap analysis. Thank you for tuning into this week's edition of the Empathic Designer podcast. If you like what you heard, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. You can hit the bell icon for getting regular updates from my channel. As always, if you have any questions or feedback, please leave a message on the comment section below and I'll be glad to respond. Thank you and have a great day.